that life you always wanted, but you didn't know. 'Cause you didn't know.
Hello and welcome to the Kalamazoo Church of Christ podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We're a startup church we just planted in September 2020. And at the Kalamazoo Church, we believe that Christianity is done best when it is done together. And so if you live in the Kalamazoo area, we would love to connect. Be it coming to a Sunday service, one of our small groups, or even just grabbing coffee with a member to learn more. You can visit kalamazoo.church in order to do that. We pray that you are inspired by what you hear today.
Sweet. Well, very cool, guys. Again, it's so cool to be able to worship in this way. You guys can open up to John 2. We'll be there in a minute. I want to, I'm excited. Clearly, you see in the background, there's some decor. And so we're hoping for success today, praying for success. We know that God is God of all things, and we know that God is he's the God of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers fans as well, and he's the God of the Chiefs fans. He's the God of the Bills fans. Definitely the God of the Packer fans, and he's the God of, if you don't have any interest in football, he's your God as well. I'm just really excited. We've been looking in a bunch of different scriptures and really making a point that this year we're gonna be awesome. We're gonna be people who make a point to memorize scripture. And I don't know how that's going for you, but wherever it's going, I think if you say, well, there's 3 and I don't know any of them, that's okay. There's gonna be a 4th today, and worry about the 3 when when there's a different time. But let's make a point that to know this 4th one then. But if right now, so the first one's James 3:16, and if you can't, I'm gonna check the comments. If you know without even looking, don't copy and paste it from Bible Gateway. But if you know without even looking that I know the scripture, go ahead and comment it. James 3:16. Comment what it says, and then you can edit it later if you don't like if you messed up on a word or whatever. And then the other one was 1 Timothy 6:6. You can comment that as well. And then last week was Philippians 2:3. And so all of these, there's a bunch. It's pretty thematic of the idea of being selfless people. And we've been talking about selfishness, and now is kind of the fun part. If you'll work with me here, we were for the last 3 weeks defining what selfishness was, and I don't know if you felt it. I certainly felt it as I was preparing the lessons, that it turned into something that was it was good. It's absolutely necessary, but it's kind of exhausting when you know you're going to church to talk about how messed up you are, and certainly there's a component of that. What we're gonna do today, today, and then for the next little bit, we're jumping into another mini series, just looking at Jesus's life and examples of how he lived out selflessness perfectly. We all understand what the Bible teaches, or we all know that the Bible teaches some amazing truths about the life of Jesus and the life that we all have to lead. But not only did God decide that he was going to tell us the proper way to live, Jesus came in the flesh and lived out that perfection. The prayer today is that we leave with a fuller understanding really of the selflessness of Jesus and what selflessness focuses on. We are over here in John 2, and we're going to look at 2 stories back to back, placed back to back of one another, and hopefully really get an idea of the stuff that Jesus focused on. So often in our society, our society wants to focus on minor things, and it wants to take the focus away from major things. For you and I, we want to be individuals who major in major things and who minor in minor things. We want to know the major things. We want to know them very well, and Christianity, how to live properly, how to go from lost to saved, the the kingship of Jesus. These are things that we want to know really well. Then there's so many minor things. I don't even want to get into the amount of minor things that we don't need to stake our claim on. And Jesus didn't stake his claim on. So here, my first point this morning is selflessness is flexible. We're going to read it. It's John 2. Here it just says, on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He didn't realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you've saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples. There they stayed for a few days. And so stop here. So we've got this wedding banquet, and this is a story that it's cool because it's a story that honestly you probably have heard so many times, but certainly even the individuals with a cursory knowledge of the Bible and Christianity would have some kind of an understanding that this is what occurred. Jesus turned water into wine. And work with me here. We're reading this. So a wedding in that day would have been about 7 days. And this was, we're not told exactly when this was, but the wedding, it would have been for a whole week. And everyone in the town was invited. So Jesus, there's no guarantee that he was really close to the wedding party at all. Maybe he was just a townsperson. Maybe he was pretty close to them. But then his mom says, "Hey, you have to do this." And Jesus, he says, "Woman," and so it would have been it was a short response. It wasn't a disrespectful response. He says, "Why do you involve me?" Which this phrase, "Why do you involve me?" is a phrase that is used a couple of times in the Bible. The connotations would be this: "Why do you involve me?" would be Jesus saying, like, I don't have a stake in this realm. This realm is not what I'm all about. You're asking me to do something on one realm when I'm of a different realm. It's a phrase that demons used actually at different points as well. And so he says, "Why do you involve me? This isn't my realm really to worry about, or rather to do this amazing thing to turn water into wine." He says, "My hour's not yet come." And then this is where you realize that Jesus had a mom, right? Because it seemed like she doesn't even pay attention to what he says. She just said, she tells the people, she says, "Hey, just listen, do whatever he tells you to do." And it makes us chuckle maybe of, you think of an overbearing mom or whatever you want to see. But just take a moment to consider this, though, that there's a worldliness in what Jesus's mom is asking him to do. It's worldly from the jump. You think about that. People literally take this argument as an acceptance, okay with it. Not only that, these 6 jars would have if you're into numerology, it's basically the significance of numbers. You would see that this number 6 actually John uses a bunch in the book of Revelation to communicate something of this world, something that's by man. It's one away from perfection, which would be 7. It's earthly and it's worldly, and so there's these 6 jars. the maker of the universe is coming onto the scene, and you would think that he would have everything so perfectly aligned and set up for, this is how I'm going to show myself, and this is how I'm going to show myself, and I'm going to continue to grow in magnitude so that people could understand who I am. This plan, his mom came in, and it seems like she changed it up from the beginning. And it was an extremely important, this is more important than anything really that you and I have going on, is Jesus communicating who he is to the entire world properly. It was vitally important. And still, he decides to do something amazing that's outside of what he wanted to do. There's no way that you can deny the power of God. These individuals that saw this, the first miracle, it says they began to believe in him. And you think, man, if they believe in him when he's turning water into wine, they have faith when he's turning water into wine, what are they going to do when he turns the old creation into something that is new and beautiful? It's incredibly selfless. He puts aside what he believes is best and makes something great, something perfect and complete out of it. Not only that, but Jesus, he didn't give a little bit. He could have given the cheap garbage wine. He gave the best wine that these individuals have ever drank. And it's a lesson for you and I that if we are going to be those who are selfless and flexible, it's not holding it over somebody's head when we decide to bend. It is giving our absolute best. It's not just changing up a schedule or having you have a perfect schedule of what this is supposed to look like, and I'm going to bend it, but I'm also going to hold it over your head. No, this is the reality of doing it, not begrudgingly, and giving your all. This is what Jesus did in this situation. You know, I think about for myself. So a couple of weeks ago, I feel like I got humbled. So a couple of weeks ago, I was making a big deal out of a Packers-Bears football game, and I did it on a Sunday. And I just said, man, I'm just excited to watch the game. And then there was some ministers that actually critiqued my lesson, and one of them mentioned, hey, I thought you were going to make a point to talk about how that was selfish. I was like, oh man, I botched that opportunity. And what happened, I was talking about how excited I am to watch the game. About 45 minutes before the game started, Bianca got a phone call from her dad. Her dad was supposed to come up here and spend a little bit of time with us. We didn't do Christmas with him. And so he was going to come drop off some presents. It was going to be a good time. But basically, her dad's car had broken down about an hour away. Her dad lives in Chicago area, so it was kind of equidistant, more or less, maybe a little bit more to our side. So the car broke down. It's 2 p.m., maybe 2:30. Game starts at 3. And I'm like, man, okay, well, I mean, I guess we got to go get him, or can he call an Uber? And there was some situation he couldn't call an Uber. And then he said, okay, the police is picking me up, not to arrest me or anything, but to take me to a place where I'm off the side of the road. Him and his friend are off the side of the road. And so I'm thinking, well, if he's off the side of the road, then he should be able, like the Uber should be able to pick him up from off the side of the road, and we might be in the clear. This is good. And certainly then we went and we picked him up. It was an hour, and now the Packer game has started. And I'm like, man, okay. You guys can already see where this is going. So we stopped, and there was a series of events. We drove back and forth and to try to pick up a part here and to pick up a part there. And all the while, there was a perfect opportunity for me to die to myself, to be selfless and to be fully engaged in encouraging and spending time with my father-in-law. But instead it was spent maybe being friendly on the outside, but inside I'm like, what are we doing? This is so avoidable. Gosh, there's a game that I want to watch on. And so I mean to bring that up as just a clear example in my life, but I'm sure you can find some in yours of you doing something or doing something for someone that you naturally don't want to do and totally missing out on the opportunity to live a selfless life. It's not just the action, it is the heart behind it as well. When Jesus gave, he gave everything and he gave the absolute best, even if it wasn't exactly what he wanted to do. You and I, we have to be malleable in matters not relating to sin. We have to be able to be a little bit flexible in matters not relating to sin. Certainly, when we'll talk about it right next, but in matters of sin, be strong. But in matters that are not sin one way or the other, we have to be malleable individuals. And if we're not, then the width of who we can impact is going to be extremely narrow. If we are those who are not malleable in matters not relating to sin, the width of who we can impact will be extremely narrow. It's only going to be those who see the world exactly as we do. It's only a few people. We're most of us are pretty normal, but it's still only a few people who see it exactly as we do. We need to be those who open doors instead of shutting these doors. We need to speak in a way that communicates that we don't have absolute authority on the best way to do something. Where in your life are you putting your opinion above somebody else's in a matter that's not related to sin? Where are you putting yourself and propping yourself up in a way that says, I know what is right, I have the absolute truth, and I actually feel bad for you that you don't? Oh, man, you don't know the right way to do it. Oh, you'll learn one day, in a very condescending way. Listening now, you may be saying, well, this guy, I know what he's doing. He's going on this millennial preacher. Everything is relative, so let's not condemn anybody. And that's not me. That's not what the Bible teaches. That's not biblical. And so my first point is selflessness is, oh man, I bought thanks. Selflessness is flexible. My second point is selflessness is rigid. We're in John 2. We're going to keep reading, and we're reading in verse 13, and you'd understand, especially in the book of John, that it's widely regarded that not all of the stories are in a chronological order, but they're placed next to each other, and they're grouped together for very specific reasons. And here, I think, is one of those reasons. And we just learned Jesus being pretty flexible. And here we're going to read where there's a rigidity to him as well. It says in verse 13, when it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem in the temple court. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then responded to him, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, I'll raise it again in 3 days." They replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you're going to raise it in 3 days?" But the temple he had spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said. Then they believed the scriptures and the words that Jesus had spoken. Now, while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, many people saw the signs he was performing and believed in his name. But Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He did not need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in each person. So stop here. We have Jesus clearing the temple court. And so I got a picture basically of what the temple court was, and I want to show it real quick here. So you should be able to see that in this temple court, this area, there's a closed area, like an area that only the Jews could be a part of. And then there was this bigger outer area that would be open to Gentiles. This bigger outer area is where these people would have been. Basically, how my image of it is essentially a flea market. They would have they had a flea market going on over here where they were selling just for convenience sake, selling these animals that would be sacrificed just for convenience sake, and they were taking up the area where the Gentiles could worship. More so than the action of this selling and buying, and more so than that, Jesus's concern was with the location of where stuff was being sold. It was being sold in the temple courts. It was being sold in a place where Gentiles had the opportunity to worship, and then just for convenience sake, it was being overrun. And so Gentiles, the Gentiles that had a desire to follow God, those who were not God's chosen people at that time, they had a desire to follow God, and they weren't given that opportunity just for convenience sake. And this irritated Jesus so much. It upset him so much so that it says he created this whip out of cords, and there is an anger that's welling up. This word zeal that is welling up, that, man, you are preventing people from an opportunity to know Jesus. This is stuff that we have to be extremely rigid on. We have to be extremely rigid when it comes to people, for the sake of quote unquote religion, distorting the truth and turning more people away from God. This stuff has to burn inside of us as we see things that we identify as not being truthful. It frustrates the mess out of me when I see people calling themselves Christians. And now hear me, this is where I'm on a pedestal or something. I've been just this week for sure, but even last week, there's been more than a few times where people in my life have brought up situations where I was not acting like a Christian, and for that I'm super, super grateful. But it frustrates me when just sharing on campus, or you're going this place or that place, and somebody identifies as being a Christian, and then in the same breath decides to do stuff that is totally unbecoming of discipleship. Does it frustrate you? Are you able to brush that stuff off? I think we have to be extremely rigid. Someone who says, I am a Christian, what they're saying is they want to hold themselves to the Bible standard of living. And if that's what somebody is going to say, then the Bible is extremely clear. It's our responsibility to help them do that. And do that in a wise way, in a loving way, in a way that has compassion. But certainly Jesus' compassion, I would put before you, in this moment was way more for the Gentiles. Those whose chance to know God was being perverted by what these Jewish people, the religious people of the day, were doing. He had way more compassion for these Gentiles than for the Jews in this moment. It's okay if you and I have that same kind of zeal. And again, you got to be thoughtful about it. And so often with this word zeal, or, man, I'm going to mess somebody up, I'm going to yell at somebody. I've been in situations where I look back and I identify that it was way more my pride that I decided to one-up this person, and it was not my genuine desire, my genuine distaste that they were perverting the gospel. our job as people who are trying to follow what the Bible teaches and help as many as possible is really it's similar to maybe a great teacher. It's similar to an awesome coach, and you think about what the responsibility of a coach is, and it is to provide as many tools as possible for somebody to succeed in the endeavor that we're coaching them in, or that a coach is coaching them in. It's to make sure that there's an opportunity to have practice and have the best gear for practice, or as good as you can possibly provide. It's to give clear instruction. It's to warn against things, and it's to direct to do things. But a great coach is able to manage all of that and still have a pretty great understanding that even if I give everything, then it's up to the individual. And I can't be in control of an individual making a mistake or messing up. I assume I'm not good at anything band related, but I assume it's similar for a band instructor. They're not the ones playing. In some ways, they're the ones directing, I guess, but they're not the ones playing. And their job, though, is to provide practice opportunities, to provide the best equipment, to provide every resource available for the individual to be successful. That was one thing that my father would talk about all of the time. That he would always say, Jaron, I'm going to give you the best of what you need in school, and then you're going to do the rest. You're going to have an opportunity to do the rest, but it's not going to be because of a lack of what you have. It's not going to be because I didn't give you the resources. And I remember, this is just imitating it. It was there's I forget if it was a protractor or a compass, but there's the I don't even know the difference necessarily all the time. It was wait, the compass is the circular one, right? Yeah. So it was a protractor where he got me this protractor, and you know protractor, right? They're like the half circles, and it's a quarter. He decided, man, I'm gonna buy a $10 protractor, and so it had like the plastic, and it was solid, and it was a little bit bigger, and then there was like this knob that you could turn so you wouldn't have to put your ruler on it. It already had this angle set up, and he would just say, Jaron, I'm gonna give you the best. And then I remember being in algebra, and this is, in 2000 and maybe 2004 or 5. It was right when this new graphing calculator came out, TI-89 Titanium. And it could do a bunch of things that I still don't even know all the things that it did, but he bought me this calculator, and nobody knew how to use it. It was brand new. It was widely, none of the teachers had any exposure with it, but he just said, Jaron, I'm going to give you the best. And I was grateful for it later on, because there was a math meet where I was able, this is my junior or senior year, where I was able to come in 4th place, just because I had this calculator that would do some of the integration for Calc 2. It just did it by itself, basically. And so I got some questions right. So I was grateful for it later on. But I share all of this to say is that our responsibility is, my dad was very rigid on the reality that I'm going to give the best and give every opportunity for my children to be successful in school. You and I, we have to be really intentional about giving individuals every opportunity to be successful as it comes to spirituality. Which be those who are rigid when we see that there's bad stuff being taught. We have to be rigid about, hey, that is incorrect. That is less than what Jesus has said. That is either it is a cheap grace, or it is a cheap understanding of grace. Either it's a cheap grace that says you can do whatever you want, or it's a cheap understanding of grace that says you have to do this and this and this and this and this. Our ears have to be perked up as we see that stuff. This is extremely rigid of Jesus. He was willing to, this is extremely selfless of Jesus. He was willing to be a bit of a scapegoat. And the reality is, the religious leaders of the day had no issue with him, or it didn't seem like they had any issue with him clearing the temple courts. Their issue was in what authority he had to do that. And so I put before us, and this is time for us to think, are there things that you and I do that we kind of know this is a little bit off and makes it a little bit more difficult for someone to follow God, and we're just waiting for somebody to open it up and to show that to us? Because we think of these two, either side, right? The flexibility and rigidity. It's worth asking, where are you too rigid? Or where are you not strict enough? Then even to have awareness of where do you lean naturally? You consider how refreshing it is for someone who majors in what is major and who minors in what is minor. Again, something that is of utmost importance, I am going to make that of utmost importance. Something that God holds so highly, I am going to hold so highly. And something that God doesn't speak much on, I'm gonna be a little bit less defiant, less pragmatic about how I communicate with certainty. This is exactly the way it is. Okay, we can turn to 2 Corinthians 6, and we're kind of preparing our hearts for communion, a little bit of a transition as we think about the selflessness of Jesus, but then also as we see our responsibility as it relates to that. Let's go to 2 Corinthians 6. So we know that right before here, first letter to the Corinthians, he says, this is the stuff you're doing way wrong. This is Paul talking. He says, this is the stuff you're doing way wrong. Literally, your worship services are doing more harm than good. And then in the second letter, it seems like there's a little bit of repentance or a decent amount of repentance from some people, but it's not reaching the full fruition. So Paul writes again, and he communicates right before this. This is our relationship. Man, Christ's love compels us, he says in 2 Corinthians 5. And then one died for all, therefore all died. And he's really painting that we're a new creation. And then he talks about our interactions and our role as we seek to help spread this message. We'll start actually in 2 Corinthians 6 and verse 1. It says, as God's co-workers, we urge you not to receive God's grace in vain. This is the cheap grace we were talking about. For he says, in the time of my favor I heard you, and in the day of salvation I helped you. I tell you, now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation. And coming up, this is 2 Corinthians 6:3. This is going to be our verse for this week. It says, we put no stumbling block in anyone's path so that our ministry will not be discredited. 2 Corinthians 6:3, we put no stumbling block in anyone's path so that our ministry will not be discredited. Rather, as servants of God, we commend ourselves in every way, in great endurance, in troubles, in hardships and distresses, in beatings, imprisonments, and riots, in hard work, sleepless nights, and hunger, in purity, understanding, patience, and kindness, in the Holy Spirit, and in sincere love, in truthful speech, and in the power of God, with weapons of righteousness in the right hand and the left, through glory and dishonor, bad report and good report, genuine yet regarded as impostors, known yet regarded as unknown, dying and yet we live on, beaten and yet not killed, sorrowful yet always rejoicing, poor yet making many rich, having nothing and yet possessing everything. We've spoken freely to you, Corinthians, and opened wide our hearts to you. We are not withholding our affection from you, but you are withholding yours from us. As a fair exchange, I speak as to my children, open wide your hearts also. Stop here. Paul is preaching, right? You don't have to dig super deep and know that his heart is with them and he is extremely convicted. He's saying that as God's co-workers, and he says, don't receive God's grace in vain. The reason that we have an opportunity where we can really take communion it's for those who have received God's grace. Though that every time we take the bread and the juice, it's saying, I've received it. I'm doing this in remembrance of you, and it is one part of my week, one small part, but it communicates so much of how I am devoting myself and how I'm going to live this next week, and I'm going to live for forevermore. As Paul did to the Corinthians, I want to urge us not to receive this grace in vain. So right now we are going to pray for communion. My brother Alec is going to pray for communion, and then there'll be some music in the background. Please feel free to meditate and consider the sacrifice Jesus made and the opportunity he gives us to be his co-workers.
Thank you so much for listening to the Kalamazoo Church of Christ podcast. If you're in the Kalamazoo area, we'd love to get connected. Please go to kalamazoo.church and fill in your information to come to a Sunday service or any other event that we have going on. In any case, you'll be hearing from us next week.
Too busy saving souls.